Have you ever wondered why we get caught in these endless loops of overthinking? Or why we take just, fleeting emotions so incredibly personally? Well, in this explainer, we are diving into something truly profound. We're going to break down the literal, moment-by-moment mechanics of how our brains actually construct our sense of self. We'll be looking at some ancient maps of the mind side by side with modern psychology to decode exactly how the I is manufactured.
To get us from the exhaustion of overthinking to some actual, practical, mental clarity, we're following a pretty specific roadmap today. We'll look at the illusion of self, define emptiness, walk through the selfing factory, examine the snake of clinging, and finally flow right into the river of ever-change.
Section 1. The illusion of self. We're kicking things off by questioning the absolute biggest assumption we make every single day.
Let's be real for a second. We spend so much of our time daydreaming about me and mine, right? Constantly trying to figure out how to get our needs met. And man, it feels incredibly real. But if we look at ancient maps of the mind, and even modern evolutionary biology, they tell us this solid self is actually an elusive, completely constructed concept. The texts call this lack of a permanent self emptiness. But what does that actually look like in real life?
You know, when a lot of people hear the word emptiness, they immediately picture this bleak, dark void. But it's totally not that. The Buddha actually compared our minds to an empty hut out in the forest. Picture walking into this little cabin. It's fully furnished. You've got a table, a dresser, some chairs, but there's no actual person, no permanent I living inside it. Our minds are exactly like that hut. We are packed full of the furniture of thoughts, feelings, and biological processes, but there is absolutely no solid, unchanging me sitting at the center of it all. We just kind of trick ourselves into believing there is.
Which brings us to Section 2, Defining Emptiness. What's really fascinating here is how we humans try to pin down this super fluid concept.
It's human nature, right? We want to define things so we can put them in a neat little box. But as scholars like Stephen Batchelor point out, different cultures have interpreted this concept in wildly different ways over the centuries. For example, the practitioner Shantideva saw emptiness purely through the lens of compassion. Fast forward a few hundred years, and the Zen teacher Huineng defined it as space, literally a space so vast it holds planets, moons, stars, the whole shebang. So the goal here isn't to memorize some rigid dictionary definition. It's really an invitation to see what this openness means for you personally on your own path.
And this quote just brilliantly captures that fluidity. The Buddha once said, "I've taught for 45 years and I've never uttered a word." I mean, think about that for a second. He's talking about teaching from a place of pure observation, ultimate truth. There's no ego, no solid self up there on a podium giving a lecture. It was just nature observing nature, passing the message along without an I clinging to it. It's a really powerful reminder of what living without that rigid ego actually looks like.
Moving on to Section 3, the selfing factory. Let's really slow down a single microsecond of perception and see where this self is actually manufactured.
This sequence comes from the Honeyball Sutta, and it's basically a masterclass in early psychology. Okay, imagine you see a bird. Step 1 is pure biology. Photons hit your retina. There's no you yet, just contact. Step 2, your nervous system instantly slaps a pre-verbal feeling tone on it. Let's say it's pleasant. Step 3, you label it, bird. Step 4, you think, oh, what a lovely bluebird. And then step 5, you just cascade into mental proliferation, or what's called papunka. You start thinking, oh, I've never seen one here before. That reminds me of that Charlie Parker song I loved in college. I wonder if I still have that record. I should really check the attic. Boom. Suddenly, the I is fully born, completely wrapped up in the past and future, and you are totally pulled out of the present moment.
Now, the real turning point of this whole factory happens at step 2, the feeling tone. Before you even think a single word, your mammalian brain assigns a tone. If the contact is pleasant, the mind automatically creates craving and greed. We want more of it. If it's unpleasant, like reading a passive-aggressive email from your boss, and suddenly you're mentally drafting your resignation letter before you've even finished your coffee, the mind creates aversion, and we push it away. And if it's just neutral, we tend to ignore it, which leads to delusion. Now, this isn't a personal failing, it's a deeply ingrained biological mechanism. But recognizing these tones, that is exactly how we get our power back.
We can literally step off this overthinking treadmill just by tweaking our internal language. When your brain defaults to the active voice, like I see the bird or I am so angry, it solidifies the ego. You become the victim of your own thoughts. But if you try shifting to a mindful passive voice, just quietly noting seeing, or thinking, you throw a wrench in the factory line. You don't get swept away. You actually regain your agency right at the point of contact.
Section 4. The snake of clinging. Here is where we look at the second engine of this factory, our habit of grasping.
Grasping at anything in life is literally like grabbing a snake. If you cling to something pleasant, say an amazing vacation or the best meal of your life, it's like gently grabbing a snake by its tail. You get a few moments of enjoyment for sure, but eventually when the experience ends, that snake is going to turn around and bite you. You suffer when it's gone. But if you resist or grasp at an unpleasant experience, it's like grabbing a furious snake right behind the head. You are guaranteeing yourself an immediate, painful bite, because you're directly wrestling with reality.
This quote really anchors the whole idea. It proves that letting go of this rigid self doesn't mean turning into some emotionless robot. You can absolutely still enjoy pleasant things. The secret is just not letting them invade your mind and take over your identity. You appreciate the joy as it happens, and when it inevitably fades, you just let it go without the suffering, because there's no greedy eye desperately trying to lock it in a cage.
And finally, Section 5, the river of ever-change. Let's zoom out and see how all these mechanics flow together in our day-to-day lives.
Life is basically a river of ever-changing, totally fleeting experiences just rolling by. When we cling, when we judge, when we spiral into that mental proliferation, it's like we're reaching into the river, plucking a single drop of water out and squeezing it tightly. The second you pull it from the flow and say, I want this or I hate this, you create this solid I. You create friction between me and the world. But when we stop clinging, we just gently place the experience back into the river and watch it flow by. So if you ever catch yourself holding an experience hostage and spiraling into anxiety, try asking yourself this. Are my thoughts right now helping me feel safe, satisfied, or connected? Remember, evolutionary science tells us that the I developed hundreds of thousands of years ago purely as a survival tool. We didn't have sharp claws or thick scales, so we developed cleverness, tribal bonding, and a nervous system hardwired strictly to keep us safe, satisfied, and connected. When your mind goes into overdrive, check in. Are these thoughts actually serving that evolutionary purpose? If not, you can safely toss them back into the river.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, if I have no self, who the heck is paying my taxes? Who's responsible for what I do? Well, this is where we have to understand two truths. The ultimate truth is what we've been diving into. There is no permanent I, just raw biology in passing experiences. But we still live in the relative truth. In the real world, you still have to pay your bills, remember your passwords, and treat people with kindness. Just like society needs to hold a driverless car company accountable if it causes a crash, you are absolutely accountable for your actions in the relative world. Emptiness doesn't give us a free pass to check out. It actually helps us navigate reality with way more care and a whole lot less friction.
I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on. You are not some permanent, unchangeable statue. Your sense of self is being constantly manufactured in a rapid-fire factory of biology, feelings, and thoughts. And because it's being built microsecond by microsecond, you have an incredible amount of power. So the next time a feeling tone pops up, are you going to blindly jump back onto the hamster wheel of overthinking? Or are you going to step back, watch the river, and consciously choose exactly how to build yourself in the very next moment? Thanks for exploring this with us.